what's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. We're getting into it now, right? By the end of the month, the Patriots will have made a franchise-defining decision. Think about this. In 54 years, the Patriots have used four first-round picks on quarterbacks. 1971, they took Jim Plunkett. They didn't win anything with Jim Plunkett at quarterback, but when they traded him, they got 3 first-round picks back that they turned into John Hannah, a Hall of Famer, Darryl Stingley, a brilliant player. Sam Cunningham. If he's not a Patriots Hall of Famer, he ought to be. He was a beast. And they also continued to draft well through the rest of that decade. And they didn't get to a Super Bowl, but brilliant. The next quarterback they drafted was 1983. It was 15th overall pick. It was Tony Eason. And 3 years later, they were in the Super Bowl. Now, people can complain about Tony Eason being a little bit soft, but roll it back, you'll see some good Tony Eason play. And that team overall, again, bottomed out at the beginning of the decade. 1982, they had the first overall pick with Ken Sims. Next year was 15th with Tony Eason. By the end of the decade, or middle of the decade, they were in a Super Bowl. And then they declined, which got them to Drew Bledsoe in 1993. And what happened with Drew Bledsoe? Within 4 years, they were in the Super Bowl, regardless if they just wandered into that because the Jacksonville Jaguars beat a Denver Broncos team the Patriots could never get past and paved their way. They still got to the Super Bowl. And they had a real good decade in the 90s, which bottomed out at the end. And then they wandered into Brady. But then the next first round pick was Mac Jones, 15th overall. Well, of the 4 we've talked about, Plunkett, Eason, Bledsoe, Jones, Mac's the only guy who was a complete and utter bust. The Patriots have a chance again to take a quarterback in the first round for the 5th time in 50 years. You hate to see him doubling up like this quickly, twice in 3 years. Well, that means something went horribly wrong. What happens if they take a quarterback at the top? We're going to get into it today. First guy up, we're going to have Tony Pauline from Sports Skeeta. I've known Tony for a long time. You're going to love him. He's an unbelievable draftnik. And he is hearing that J.J. McCarthy is going to the New England Patriots, or at least that Eliot Wolf, the de facto GM, is in love with him. After that, we're going to have Phil in to get some reaction to the J.J. McCarthy conversation and also go deeper on the wide receivers in this year's draft. So without any further ado, here's my guy, Tony Pauline. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you guys to a friend of mine named Tony Pauline. Now, I got to know Tony when I was working at NBC Sports.com, covering the whole league, because Tony, when I was doing that in the late aughts, was one of the foremost draft experts. He's been doing this since the late 80s. Let me just bring you in. And since 1997, Tony, you've been doing this as well. For who?
Tom, thanks for having me. Yeah, long time. I actually started in the late 80s with some of the beat writers in the New York area, guys like Brian Burwell, may ring a name to some people, would lean on me for information. And then what happened is actually in the early 90s, a guy by the name of Pat Curran, who was working for the New York Jets at the time, recommended that I go out on my own, which I did in 1997, for better or worse. And it's a labor of love. As Bill Parcells said, it's very addictive. Even times when you try and pull yourself away from it sucks you back in. So, yeah, the draft is a 12-month-year process for me. And now it just gets really crazy, as you're about to find out.
Yeah, we're in rarefied air for New Englanders right now, up there at number 3. And you had a report of chatter around the league that the Patriots may well open eyes and take J.J. McCarthy at 3 overall. Obviously, it's been a Daniels or Drake May conversation most of the way through. McCarthy closing hard on the outside. What are you hearing?
Well, you got to remember, March was pro day month, and I cover the pro days at Sports Skeeta daily. I mean, sometimes we're having three reports, three stories a day from the different pro day reports. And when you have these pro days, you get the scouts, you get the coaches, general manager, directors of player personnel, directors of scouting. And what I heard from other general managers, not from the Patriots, but other general managers, is that Eliot Wolf, the de facto general manager for the Patriots, is in love with J.J. McCarthy. And right now, the feeling is that J.J. McCarthy, or at least Eliot Wolf, is pushing for JJ McCarthy. And that seems like it's going to be the pick. I could understand the love for JJ McCarthy. I don't agree with it, but I understand it because whether it's JJ McCarthy or any of these Michigan kids, they have acquitted themselves well during the interview process. You watch JJ McCarthy, he's got great confidence, great moxie on the field. He's a great leader. I question his physical skills, but that moxie and that confidence has come over in the interview process. We saw it with Bryce Young last year, for better or worse. If you remember Bryce Young, he was being characterized as a genius during interview process. And teams fall in love with that type of player, especially at the quarterback position.
When we talk about J.J. McCarthy and Drake May moving from Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, Caleb's in a different stratosphere right now, but those three quarterbacks, it seems as if the leadership skills of Drake May, and I did a long story about it, and his physical toughness would be extremely appealing for a team like New England, who has a crappy offensive line and no wide receivers. So what's the package that you're seeing right now from Drake May in terms of physical toughness, leadership, and ability?
I think the issue with Drake May is he really tailed off in 2023. You can make the argument that he was a better quarterback in 2022 than he was in 2023. Sometimes that's a dangerous thing. Sam Howell, if you remember Sam Howell, the last year before he entered the draft, he had a terrible year. The prior year, he was a top 10 pick, where you got Jaden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy, maybe not Caleb Williams, really coming off of playing great football. I think that is a knock on Drake May. I think it's a legitimate knock. I like Drake May. I think when you look at the ability to make plays with his legs, he's not deficient in that area, but he's not as good as J.J. McCarthy or Jaden Daniels as an RPO type of quarterback. You know, if you're New England and like you said, you're deficient on the offensive line and the receiver position, you want to draft Drake May, put him back there, have the crap beat out of him. And then when you get that offensive line and receiver positions, when you get them to where you want them, maybe a guy like Drake May's got cabin fever. I don't know about that. The J.J. McCarthy situation kind of went hand in hand what I reported coming out of the combine, and it's that teams seem to be hot and cold on Drake May. And I had heard coming out of the combine that the Patriots would be open to trading down and getting a Michael Penix later on. And then lo and behold, the coach comes out and says, well, it's not a guarantee we're going to draft a quarterback at 3.
Yeah. I'd interject with this just on what I've seen. The Patriots are defaulting quarterback right now, Tony. That is their default setting. They have to be moved off of that spot. Now, they'd either be moved off of that spot because of being disconcerted by the interviews that they do with May, McCarthy, or Daniels and say none of these guys are going to fit, or by somebody, as Mayo said, throwing a bag at them. Now, what bag necessitates them moving down? My estimation, what I'd say is the Patriots have to get both of Minnesota, for instance's first-round picks this year and then next year's. Otherwise, you really don't have as much mobility next year if you don't have 2 first-rounders. But to me, I think their default is quarterback. That is what Robert Kraft wants in his fans' hat, he's saying. I think it's worth remembering, too, with Kraft, he is a full-on fan. He does not watch tape. He does not have opinions on footwork or arm speed or any of that. So I think the Patriots are defaulting quarterback. When I look at May and I watched a cut-up of every single throw and every single run from him the last 2 nights, I've watched it both nights. He's tough as hell, physically tough. He takes a hit against Minnesota. He gets speared in the back early in the game. Next play, I mean, he was hurt. Next play, a scramble, a productive scramble, not a scared scramble. And then the play after that just rips a completion. So I think they're going to love that aspect because that's going to be important to a team like New England that is somewhat had a drift, Tony.
Yeah. I think the dynamicism of Drake May is not what it is of the other quarterbacks. And I would agree with you. And I said, he didn't play well down the stretch. And I think that's because the team around him was falling apart. And I think he tried to do too much. He lost a lot of his top targets off of the 2022 season, also lost some offensive linemen. And, North Carolina with Mac Brown there, could never seem to get over the hump. And I do think that Drake May is a bit undervalued at this point in time. I mean, there was talk coming into the season in the scouting community, who's the number one quarterback, Caleb Williams or Drake May? It was not a definite sort of situation. But I think that personality that Caleb Williams has, that leadership and those interviews that J.J. McCarthy has, the fact that Jaden Daniels, literally from the mid part of 2022 through 2023, just seemed to play better and better and better. I think that's appealing for a lot of teams and a lot of personnel directors, especially, in the day and age of now football, instant coffee football, if you will. That package that you would be talking about, the 2 first-round picks from Minnesota plus, additional picks is very appealing 15, 20 years ago. But, we no longer live in the day and age where you're going to wait on a player for 3 years. Look what happened with Mac Jones. It's, people want to know now if the player is an NFL prospect or a legitimate NFL player in 3 weeks. They don't want to wait 3 years anymore.
And that's where I think the Patriots are going to be stuck, because they are quite likely going to be in a position where they're putting somebody to the side and saying, hey, you're going to apprentice for a little bit here. And two, just to Tony's point, that was a 6-0 North Carolina team that finished 7-4. And even in getting to 6-0, there were some wins in there against the Campbell team that people will cite and look at and say, look at these throws. It's Campbell, ladies and gentlemen. Appalachian State, he did not look good in that game, although there are aspects in every game with Drake May where there are things that he does that make you say, he's a decisive runner. He's a strong kid. He's a good leader. He's got a brilliant arm. It's just he does some silly things, silly and stupid things, pick out of his own end zone. Anyway, be that as it may, give me the quick skinny too while I have you here, Tony, on the wide receivers. It seems like a loaded group.
Real good wide receiver group, real good offensive tackle group. I mean, you're looking at the top of the receivers. You look at Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think has done all the wrong things in the lead up to the draft. He's not going to do this. He's not going to do that. People say, look at the film. Yeah, but, people forget, whether it's the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl, the Combine, this is one huge job interview. And when you're telling someone that's going to invest tens of millions of dollars into you, you're not going to do A, B, and C, which other players have had. It's going to leave a bad taste in people's mouths. Still, he's a great receiver. He is a game-controlling receiver with sneaky speed, not that great running after the catch, but he's going to be a number one wideout, as will be Rome Odunze, who is a high-character guy, catches the ball incredibly well, did a great job when his teammate Jalen McMillan was injured, basically ran that Washington Husky team into the college football playoffs. If you remember, 4th down, they ran him on a reverse. He picked up 23 yards. A bigger guy who can separate through routes. He's not just a contested catch guy, but he can run routes and separate. And then you got Malik Neighbors. And, I mean, he's the most explosive of the three. Yeah. He's the guy who's the downfield threat. He's the guy who's the great route runner, will separate over the field. I think, like Jaden Daniels, just got better and better and better as his college career has gone on the past year and a half. And, I mean, bottom half of round one, you got a guy like Brian Thomas, who was Malik Neighbors' teammate, who's as big, as fast, as fluid, only had one big year of production. But I think there's going to be a lot of receivers there for the Patriots. I think
Mitchell,
Donnie Mitchell of Texas, former Georgia transfer, who was a dominant receiver at Georgia as a freshman. Didn't have problems this year, but they had so many pass catchers at Texas this year. Like Brian Thomas, he didn't have those great opportunities. Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin's going to fit in there somewhere. I think the bigger issue is looking at it from the outside in with the Patriots. As good as they've been at times at certain positions like offensive tackle and quarterback, they don't seem to be able to develop a receiver. I mean, how many first-round misses, early misses have they had at the receiver position?
It's oodles, and it's discouraging, and it's why they end up in the free agent market so frequently. And, if you're shopping in the free agent market these days and somebody's hit the free agent market, it's because they're not a top-tier receiver. They're a second-tier receiver, because those franchise guys are generally buttoned up. Xavier Legette, and then I'm going to let you go. What do you think of the South Carolina receiver?
big, fast guy, excellent vertical speed, excellent 40 speed, a bit one-dimensional. He's got to improve his route running. He's got to do more than win out for the contested throw or win out by beating people down the sidelines, which is a good thing. But he's got to round and complete his game. Has a lot of upside. Could be a real good receiver 2 or 3 years down the road. I think with the Leggett, you're looking probably a third round type of receiver who's got great upside, who just has to really learn the position.
What'd you think of Tyquan Thornton and N'Keal Harry when they were coming out?
I thought they were both overdrafted. N'Keal Harry was your bigger contested type of guy who wasn't super fast. Thornton was a guy who, he had his moments at Baylor. He ran that 40. People fell in love with the size and the speed, but like Xavier Leggett, was far from being a complete receiver. And what happens is, if you're a bigger contested catch guy, or you're a bigger guy that's got speed, you look great on Saturday, but that does not always translate to being an NFL prospect, because now all of a sudden the best cornerback that you played against on Saturday is the worst cornerback that you're going to play against on Sunday, is maybe the dime back. So you can't get away with just winning for contested catch because you're physically bigger and stronger than everybody. You can't get away with just running down the sidelines and running past people because everybody else is just as fast, just as strong, just as athletic.
Tony Pauline, a national treasure. We appreciate you very much. Again, it's Sportskeeda, SportsKeeda.com.
That's it.
Hit it. Go find Tony's work. Tony, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Here's our guy. Here's the old standby. It's the senator,
Hey.
the indefatigable Phil Perry. Buddy, JJ McCarthy, chatter, as we heard our friend Tony Pauline talk about, to the Patriots at number 3. Is that an eye-popping development in your mind?
Eye-popping? No, I wouldn't say eye-popping, only because JJ McCarthy does a lot of things that I think Eliot Wolf would like. And the reason I say that is because there is a certain kind of quarterback that the Ron Wolf executive tree has invested in with high-end picks from the past, first or second round picks. And they are, generally speaking, guys who have pretty good size, which McCarthy has, 6'2.5", almost 220 pounds at the combine, who can move, who can throw on the move, and have good enough arms. And I would say specifically even for Eliot Wolf, Tom. Eliot Wolf, assistant GM of the Cleveland Browns in 2018 when they had the number 1 overall pick and they took Baker Mayfield. And Eliot Wolf was one of the primary eyeballs on Baker Mayfield during that evaluation process. He thought Baker Mayfield was clearly the best quarterback in that year's class. He liked the intangibles that he brought to the table, the energy that he brought to his teammates, his moxie, the fact that he won. Who's got moxie? Who's got intangibles? Who won more than any quarterback in this year's draft class? It's JJ McCarthy, Tom. So that's why I say not eye-popping, though I don't think they should invest in him at number 3 overall. It does not stun me that they might.
Okay. Now we have a quick slants poll out at the moment, and I'm going to give you the up to the minute voting in this poll. Let's refresh that. These are the kinds of things I should do while Phil's talking, but I want to give him my full attention. Right now we have 1,948 votes. 8% of the voters say, great, perfect fit to JJ McCarthy being purportedly the 3rd overall pick of the Patriots, thanks to Eliot Wolf. 8%. 19.4% say, not giddy, I trust him though. And then 72.6% say, that's a horrible idea. Horrible idea. So I don't know. Again, a lot of this isn't about the player as much as it is the situation. And that's what, when I've discussed Drake May over the last few weeks and talked about move down, get picks, wait for the quarterback tree to drop a new one to you next year. It's not about Drake May as much as it is you can fill these other positions and not put all your chips on one guy. I think with JJ McCarthy, it's less about JJ McCarthy and more about, whoa. What's this new thing on the menu? And I now have to consider. So to me, it's a curveball for folks. Phil, agree that might be what's going on?
I think that's part of it, because I think people do get locked into their likes and their dislikes relatively early in the process here. And So that could be a factor. The reason I'm not sure it is with JJ McCarthy is because the downsides to drafting JJ McCarthy, I think, are kind of obvious. He didn't throw that much at Michigan. He just plain and simple
told us why.
Okay. That's great. The reasoning could be perfectly sound. But when your volume of throws isn't what it is for some other guys, it leads you to wonder as a fan, not only why that is, but, well, what will it mean for my team when my team's asking him to do way more than he had to do in college? This is going to be the third overall pick, who's coming from arguably the best situation, coaching staff, offense, defense, in the country. I don't think he had the high-end offensive talent that Jaden Daniels did at LSU. But boy, the reason he wasn't asked to do very much was because he didn't have to. And the ecosystem offensively here in New England is nowhere near the same setup in terms of offensive line, in terms of playmakers. You have to be the guy. You got to put that cape on every once in a while if you're the number 3 overall pick. And you never really, for an extended period, saw JJ McCarthy do that. Now, I think what Thor and others might say is, well, look at his numbers on third down. Look at his numbers in the red zone, 2-minute, 4-minute, situational football. Guy's pretty damn good. And I agree. I just think when you are looking at somebody like Drake May or Jaden Daniels or some of these other options, and you see what talented individuals they are in a vacuum, I think it's easier to project pro success than, a guy who finished a variety of games this past year with 14 throws, 16 throws, 12 throws. It's a little bit harder. There's more unknown, I think, with JJ McCarthy because the volume is not there.
We could oversimplify, though, and say that JJ McCarthy could be plugged into an offense similar to what the Cleveland Browns kind of ran, which, had one of the most proficient running games in the league for the past few years, centered around Nick Chubb. Patriots don't have Nick Chubb, certainly, and they had brilliant offensive linemen. But JJ McCarthy might be a good fit in a ball control offense. Not that sexy, not the way to say, hey, enjoy us for the rest of the decade. We're going to be, the 68 Packers. But that, to me, could be, go ahead.
If you could run it that way, then great. That's what they did at Michigan. They were ball control. Manage the game. And great. Like game managers have their place. They have value. One of the comps that I like, I know our friend Bucky Brooks likes this one too. And this is part of the reason I could envision him being an Eliot Wolf pick, is because this guy was selected 1 overall by a Ron Wolf pupil and Scott McLuhan. San Francisco, 2005, I believe, was the draft class. Number 1 overall, Alex Smith goes off the board. Ultimate game manager. He's got some athleticism to him. He's got a fine arm. He's got decent enough size. I think those guys are relatively similar in terms of what they bring to the table, but Alex Smith wasn't carrying an offense. When he had success, it was because he was surrounded by talented pieces in Kansas City with good coaching staff. And that's what JJ McCarthy is going to need, in my opinion. So the rebuild, you've got to do an even better job and do it even more quickly for JJ McCarthy, I think, than you would for Jaden Daniels or Drake May.
Speaking of Drake May, I spent 95 minutes watching every throw, every run from his 2023 season. I talked about it a little bit with Tony Pauline. I wrote a story on it. The most impressive thing in the 95 minutes to me was what the Patriots have stressed and emphasized time and time and time again. All these guys have good arms. All these guys can move, even taking Caleb Williams out of it. But the physical toughness and resilience, the ability to lift all boats, and even, as Gerard Mayo said, to take a hit and be able to stand up after it is persuasive. Mac Jones, one of the indelible moments of his career, unfortunately, in New England, was getting injured at the end of the Baltimore Ravens game, hopping off all the way to the sideline on 1 foot in 2022, and then being carried down the stairs like he was being, hustled to the medical tent in Normandy. I mean, it just didn't look great. And look, ankle sprains suck. But it's a physical, violent game in which collisions happen on every play, and there's physical pain on every single play. It is the coin of the realm in the NFL, how well you can deal with pain, not injury. Injury is different, and an ankle sprain's an injury. But I watched Drake May take a shot in the back from a player named, it was Kalen Baugh from Minnesota, 305-pound defensive tackle, put his helmet into Drake May's spine at the end of a scramble, landed full force so that his feet actually pinwheel pedaled in the air. Drake May was hurt, got up within 5 seconds, took the play, scrambled with purpose on the next play, and then threw one of the best passes of the game for a 14-yard gain on the ensuing play. And you could still tell that he was hurt just by the way he was carrying his head. But there wasn't any complaining to the sideline. There wasn't any asking for a flag. There wasn't any flopping around like a salmon. That stuff does matter. And I know the player safety is at a premium, and it always should be, but the ability to soldier on matters. And I think that 3-play sequence is going to be something that is persuasive for the Patriots. He's going to be out there every friggin' week, Phil. Knock on wood for the kid's career. But you can't guarantee that with a Joe Burrow or a Lamar Jackson or a slightly built Jaden Daniels. It matters.
It's toughness, which I think is in some ways innate. I think some ways it's developed. His upbringing is an interesting one to me. Had 3 older brothers, all excellent athletes. His dad played quarterback. There's, I'm sure, a level of competitiveness that gets bred into you being in an environment like that one. But Tom, also just his frame is going to allow him to be more durable, which is obviously it's a different word, but it's equally important as a football player. I think that frame is going to allow him to be more durable than Jane Daniels, who I think is tough. I think Jane Daniels is tough. I think JJ McCarthy is tough. I think Drake May is built in such a way that not only will he be able to pop back up because of whatever is inside him as a tough human being, but when you're built a certain way, the way Jaden Daniels is, and even JJ McCarthy, who looks slighter, he, like JJ McCarthy or like Jaden Daniels, probably put on a little bit of weight right before the combine, right before he was weighed officially. So is he going to be closer to 212 by November of 2024? He might be. I'm going to put my money on the guy who weighs 223 right now, and you could easily see as a 21-year-old in 2 years, you could see him being 6'4", 230, Tom, and have it be good weight. I'd be more willing to invest in that.
Teammates are cognizant of the way a player reacts to a hit because they all go through the same pain and physical violence on every play too. And they're all trying to conquer it. And when they see a player deal with it in a particular way, it matters. It mattered when Brady got his helmet knocked off in 2001 and immediately stood up and went to find it. It mattered when Ty Law in 2004 tore his ACL and on the other side of the field made sure that he walked off the field because he said, no carts ever going to take me off the field in my hometown of Pittsburgh. So it does matter. And all that said, I want to turn just quickly to give some attention to Phil's prototypical Patriots. He's doing them for the website, NBCsports.com, NBCSportsBoston.com, Phil. And what did your prototypical Patriots and wide receiver yield for the player who should be sought or could be sought? And give me your caveat at the top, how difficult this is this year.
Yeah, it's really difficult on the offensive side, especially. Defensively, I think the Patriots are going to be interested in a lot of the same things that they have been, Tom, for a long time. Even with Bill Belichick gone, they're going to be running that Belichick scheme that Gerard Mayo was leading the charge for these last few years. But offensively, understanding what Eliot Wolf might like and what Alex Van Pelt might like has been a challenge, just because for a long, long time, we knew what Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels wanted. And with Eliot Wolf, you do have to go back to the executive tree that he is connected to, in my opinion, because he hasn't run his own front office. And we could just go off the draft picks that were made in 2018 and 2019 with John Dorsey as the GM and Eliot as the assistant GM, but it gives us a better breadth of data, a better sample size, a stronger sample size, in my opinion, if you go all the way back and you include Ron Wolf and you include Ted Thompson and you include John Dorsey, who was GM in Kansas City as well, Reggie McKenzie, GM for the Raiders, Scott McCloughan, who I mentioned earlier, Washington and San Francisco. He was heading up their personnel department at 2 different points in time. John Schneider in Seattle. So all of these guys have shown what they value in certain positions, especially, again, on the offensive side of the ball. And a lot of them share prototypes, if you go back and you look at it. And at receiver, it's been interesting to me. I could tell you there have been 18 receivers drafted by these guys in the first or second round. Only a couple drafted in the first round. Javon Walker in 2002 was actually a Mike Sherman pick for the Packers. Michael Crabtree was a Scott McLuhan first rounder, and Amari Cooper is a very high first rounder by Reggie McKenzie for the Raiders. But on average, of these 18 guys that I looked at, first and second round picks by these GMs, on average, 6'1", 203, 4'4", 540, 4'18" short shuttle time, extremely quick, and explosive for their size. 36, and a half inch vertical, 10.4 broad jump. The broad jump is in the 69th percentile. The 40 time is very good. The short shuttle time is very good. And they're bigger bodies, 6'1", 203. So they don't have a lot of, Deion Branch types in the second round. Randall Cobb was a second rounder, a little bit of an outlier for them. Dwayne Eskridge was a shorter burner that John Schneider took in the second round. But for the most part, it's your Devontae Adams, your Jordy Nelson, DK Metcalf is sort of the prototype, I think, here. Second round pick, big body, good speed, great explosiveness. That's sort of what they're after, big picture. And in terms of how we can find those guys in this year's draft class, what I found interesting, at least, is that in terms of the thresholds we were looking for, that they seem to be looking for, the truly talented options at this position who check the boxes that we sought, they get really thin really quickly.
Oh no. And this is basically, folks, for an X receiver. Correct, Phil?
That's what it seems like they draft early. When they draft a receiver early, he's a bigger body guy who tends to play outside the numbers. Again, there are a couple of outliers. Jaden Reed's a good example of an outlier just recently drafted by the Packers. But to me, Christian Watson, again, another recent Packers draft pick, is more of the prototype at that position. Tall, angular, really fast, pretty quick, really explosive. Too. So X receivers is what they've drafted early at this position.
And just so folks are up to date on the Patriots at the X receiver now, their X receiver previously was Devontae Parker. That's who was holding that down. N'Keal Harry was supposed to be their X receiver. X is the outside boundary receiver. Kendrick Bourne is more of an interior guy. He can play out there if he needs to, but he's not a stretcher. Tyquan Thornton probably isn't long enough to win a lot of 50-50 balls. He could play the X. Doesn't look like his career is going in the right direction, candidly. And then Demario Douglas and KJ Osborne would not be X players.
Correct. Yeah, they'd be your Fs or your slots, right? So I'll read you names, and they're all, Tom, they're projected by most to be first-round picks. So if the Patriots go quarterback at 1, these guys are all going to be off the board by the time they get to 34 overall. It's Rome Odunze. Marvin Harrison, we assume, would have made this list, but he didn't test, so we don't have any data for him, and that's a lot of what I'm working off of. Rome Odunze is the best fit. He checks every single box. He's one of the few guys who does, and does so solidly, easily. The next two also check every single box that we look for. These are day 2 guys, so these are real options, and I'd have my eye on them round 2 or 3, maybe even round 4 if they're still around. Jalen McMillan, Rome Odunze's teammate at Washington, 6'1", 197, fast enough, 4.47, 37-inch vertical. He looks like a big slot. That's how he's being written up in some of these scouting reports, but maybe they would play him on the outside because of his size and his explosiveness. Luke McCaffrey, Christian McCaffrey's brother, Ed McCaffrey's son. He's one of the, of the 3 guys that checked every box that we were looking for. He's one of the 3. 6'2", 198 out of Rice. He was a quarterback 2 years ago. Really quick, very, very quick. Short shuttle time, 4.02 second short shuttle. That's elite, especially for somebody who's, again, sort of angular the way he is. Those guys are not first-round picks, but Odunze is. Malik Neighbors, who's on this list, is. Brian Thomas out of LSU as well is considered a first-round pick. Adonai Mitchell, a lot of people out of Texas believe he'll go in the first round. Then you get to the guys that might truly be options for the Patriots at 34. And I'm talking about Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Johnny Wilson from Florida State, and then you're getting into some day 3 options, maybe even undrafted options, Tom. So it runs dry really quickly. And if you want to get a young receiver to pair with a young quarterback, you might have to do it at 34.
There you go. Phil, we're going to put a cork in it because we spoke to Tony Pauline at the top. We talked J.J. McCarthy with him, and we also talked wide receivers, and Xavier Legette. We went in depth on him because we knew that he was one of your preferred targets and a guy who'd be sitting there quite likely in the second round at 34. He's out of South Carolina. He's a Gamecock. All right, Phil, quick slants tonight. Next, Pats, what do you got this week?
We're going to have 2 Next Pats episodes. We're going to continue to roll out our fantastic pre-draft conversations with a variety of individuals. So I'm not even going to tell you who we have for our next episode, but it's going to be a worthwhile listen. I'll just say that.
All right, good deal. We'll be back on Thursday. We're going to have JP Finlay from Washington telling us what the Commanders might do at number 2. And also we're going to go a little bit more in depth with Joe Person from The Athletic. He knows Drake May. His kids go to the same high school as Drake May. He's interviewed Drake May and has observed the off-the-field Drake May. What's that kid like anyway? What's the family like? You got to get into this stuff if you want to take a kid and put all that kind of stuff into him. See ya.